I thought I knew my children until the day I pretended to lose everything. What happened next broke my heart and changed my will forever. One daughter stayed by my side, while the others vanished like smoke. And when I revealed the truth months later, the look on their faces was something I'll never forget. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. My name is Carlos Martinez. I'm 76 years old, and I've lived long enough to learn that money reveals people's true hearts, especially when it disappears. I built my fortune from nothing, starting with a small construction company in San Antonio back in 1972. My hands were rough from laying bricks and mixing cement. My back ached from dawn to dusk, but every dollar I earned went toward something bigger. I wanted to give my children the life I never had, growing up in a cramped apartment where the heat barely worked, and dinner sometimes meant splitting a can of beans 3 ways. By the time I turned 50, Martinez Construction had grown into something I could barely recognize. We were building shopping centers, office complexes, and residential developments across 3 states. The money started flowing in faster than I could count it, and suddenly, I owned properties in Austin, Houston, and Dallas. My bank account swelled to $8.7 million, not counting the real estate investments and the business itself. But success came with a price I hadn't anticipated. The more comfortable my children's lives became, the more distant they grew from the man who had sacrificed everything to provide for them. Peter, my oldest at 50, had inherited my stubborn streak, but none of my work ethic. He lived in a mansion in the hills of Austin, drove a different luxury car each year, and spoke to me mainly when he needed money for his latest business venture. His wife, Sandra, barely acknowledged my existence, except during family gatherings where politeness was required. They had 2 teenage daughters who called me grandfather, but looked at me like I was an antique they had to tolerate. Lucia, 46, and my middle child, lived more modestly in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. She worked as a nurse at Methodist Hospital, pulling long shifts that left dark circles under her eyes. Unlike her siblings, she never asked me for money, never hinted that she needed anything. When we talked, it was about her patients, about books she was reading, about memories from when she was small, and would help me plant vegetables in our backyard garden. Then there was Maria, 44 and the baby of the family. She had married a real estate agent named David, who wore expensive suits and spoke in the language of investments and market trends. They lived in a sprawling house in the suburbs, complete with a swimming pool and a 3-car garage. Maria called me twice a week, but our conversations always seemed to steer toward my finances, my health, and what plans I had made for the future. The doubt started creeping in during Christmas dinner last year. I was sitting at the head of the table in Peter's dining room, watching my family laugh and chat around plates of expensive food that Peter's housekeeper had prepared. The conversation flowed easily until I mentioned that I was thinking about selling one of my rental properties. The room went quiet for just a moment, but it was long enough for me to notice. Peter's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Maria exchanged a quick glance with her husband. Even Sandra looked up from her phone. "Why would you sell?" Peter asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "That property generates good rental income. Maybe I want to simplify things," I replied, watching their faces. "I'm getting older. Managing all these investments is becoming a burden." Maria leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her wine glass. "But Dad, you've worked so hard to build all this. It would be such a shame to let it go." David nodded sagely. "Carlos, in this market, holding on to real estate is the smart play. Property values are only going up." I looked around the table, seeing my children's faces illuminated by the chandelier's warm light, and felt something cold settle in my chest. When had our conversations become so focused on my assets? When had my worth to them become measured in dollars, rather than years of love and sacrifice? That night, lying in my empty house, I made a decision that would change everything. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting my plan with meticulous care. I contacted my attorney, James Woodward, and my accountant, Margaret Chen, both trusted friends who had helped me navigate business for over 20 years. I explained what I wanted to do, and while they thought I was crazy, they agreed to help. The story I would tell was simple but believable. I had invested heavily in a cryptocurrency scheme that turned out to be fraudulent. The scammers had convinced me to move most of my liquid assets into their platform, and when it collapsed, I lost nearly everything. The business was struggling due to supply chain issues and increased competition. I would have to sell my properties one by one just to stay afloat, and even then, I might end up with nothing. James helped me prepare fake documents that would support this story, documents that showed massive losses and mounting debts. Margaret worked her accounting magic to create statements that painted a picture of financial ruin. They both thought I was making a mistake, but they understood my need to know the truth about my children's love. The hardest part was calling my children to deliver the news. I started with Peter, knowing he would be the most difficult. His phone rang 4 times before he answered, and I could hear the sounds of his office in the background, people talking and phones ringing. "Dad, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can this wait?" "No, son, it can't. I need to tell you something important, and I need you to sit down." The background noise faded, and I heard a door close. "Okay, you've got my attention. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and launched into the story I had rehearsed. I told him about the cryptocurrency investment, about how convincing the scammers had been, about how I had ignored warning signs because the returns looked too good to pass up. I explained that I had lost $6 million in the scheme, and the remaining assets were tied up in legal battles that I would probably lose. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. "Peter, are you there?" "I'm here." His voice was flat, emotionless. "How could you be so stupid, Dad? How could you fall for something like that? You've been in business for 50 years. The anger in his voice surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have. "I know I made a mistake. I'm calling because I need help figuring out what to do next." "What kind of help?" "I might need to move in with one of you kids while I try to rebuild. I can't afford the house payment anymore, and the business is barely keeping me afloat." Another long silence. When Peter spoke again, his tone had changed from angry to careful, like he was talking to a client rather than his father. "Dad, Sandra and I are going through some things right now. Our marriage is a little rocky, and having another person in the house would just add stress we can't handle. Maybe Maria or Lucia could help you out." My heart sank, but I pressed on. "I understand. Could you maybe help me financially? Just temporarily, until I get back on my feet?" "I wish I could, but we're stretched pretty thin right now. The girls' private school tuition is killing us, and Sandra's been talking about needing a new car. Plus, you know how real estate is right now. Our equity is all tied up in the house." I hung up that call, feeling like I had swallowed lead. My own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, was already distancing himself from my problems. The call to Maria went even worse. "Oh my God, Dad, are you serious?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "How could you lose all that money? David is always telling his clients to diversify, to never put all their eggs in one basket." "I know I made a mistake, sweetheart. I'm calling because I need my family's support right now." Of course. We're here for you." But her voice sounded strained, artificial. "What exactly do you need?" When I mentioned needing a place to stay, I heard her cover the phone and have a muffled conversation with David. When she came back, her tone was apologetic but firm. "Dad, I talked to David, and we just don't have the space. The guest room is David's office now, and we're using the basement for storage. Plus, we've got the kids' activities, and our schedule is just crazy." She suggested I look into senior living communities, places where I could get help managing my daily needs while still maintaining some independence. She even offered to research some facilities for me, describing them as wonderful places where I could make new friends and have activities to keep me busy. I realized she was already planning to put me somewhere out of sight, out of mind. When I called Lucia, I was bracing myself for another rejection. "Dad?" Her voice was immediately concerned when she heard the heaviness in my greeting. "What's wrong?" I told her the same story I had told the others, watching my fabricated financial ruin pour out through the phone lines. But when I finished, her response was completely different. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. This must be terrifying for you." Not anger about my stupidity, not panic about her inheritance, just concern for my well-being. "Are you going to be okay? Do you have enough money for food and utilities right now?" "For a few months, maybe. But I'm going to have to sell the house, and I don't know where I'll go." "You'll come stay with me," she said without hesitation. "It's not much, just a 2-bedroom apartment, but you can have my room and I'll take the couch. We'll figure this out together." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Lucia, honey, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. You're my dad, and you took care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn to take care of you." The difference in their reactions was stark and heartbreaking. Within a week of my phone calls, the change in my relationships with Peter and Maria became obvious. Peter's calls, which had been weekly, dropped to once every 2 weeks, then once a month. When we did talk, our conversations were brief and focused on practical matters rather than family news. Maria started treating me like I was made of glass, speaking in a careful, patronizing tone that made me feel like an invalid. She sent me links to assisted living facilities and brochures for senior communities, always framing them as wonderful opportunities for me to start fresh and meet new people my own age. But Lucia stepped up in ways that amazed me. She started coming by every few days, bringing groceries and home-cooked meals. She helped me organize my papers and offered to drive me to appointments. When I mentioned that I was thinking about selling some of my furniture to raise money, she insisted that I keep everything and that she would help me pay for whatever I needed. The most telling moment came 6 weeks after my fake financial collapse. I had staged a small crisis, calling all 3 children to tell them that my electricity was going to be shut off because I couldn't pay the bill. It was a test to see how they would respond to an immediate, concrete need. Peter sighed heavily and said he was having his own cash flow problems, but maybe he could send a little something next month. Maria suggested I contact social services to see if there were programs to help seniors with utility bills. She said she would research it for me and send me some phone numbers. Lucia showed up at my door 2 hours later with a checkbook in her hand. "How much do you need?" she asked, already writing out a check. "Lucia, I can't take your money. You work so hard for every dollar." "It's not about the money, Dad. It's about making sure you're safe and comfortable. You gave me everything when I was growing up. This is nothing compared to what you did for me." She stayed for dinner that night, heating up the lasagna she had brought earlier in the week. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped her with homework 30 years ago, and talked about her work at the Burr Hospital. "There was this elderly man in the cardiac unit today," she said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "His family never visits. He told me he has 3 children, but they're all too busy with their own lives. It breaks my heart to see patients like that." She looked at me with eyes that held no judgment, no calculation of what my financial situation meant for her future, just love and concern for her father who was struggling. That night, lying in bed, I wondered if I was being fair to her. She was sacrificing for me based on a lie, giving me money she had earned through long hours and difficult work. But I also knew that this test was revealing something important about who my children really were, something I needed to understand before I made decisions about my estate. As the months passed, the pattern continued and deepened. Peter's visits became rare, usually only when Santa needed something from my house, or when they were driving past and felt obligated to stop. During these brief visits, Peter would ask pointed questions about my finances, about what debts I still owed, about what assets I had left to sell. "Dad, you need to be realistic about your situation," he said during one particularly painful conversation. "Maybe it's time to consider bankruptcy. Cut your losses and start over." He spoke like he was giving advice to a business client rather than talking to his father. There was no warmth in his voice, no acknowledgement of the decades I had spent building the wealth that was now supposedly gone. He seemed almost relieved that the burden of my expectations had been lifted from his shoulders. Maria's approach was different, but equally hurtful. She maintained the pretense of caring while steadily pushing me toward institutional care. Every conversation included subtle references to how difficult it must be for me to manage Crowless. Alone? How much safer I would be in a place with staff to help me. How many activities and social opportunities were available in senior communities. David found this amazing place in San Marcos. She said during one visit, "It's like a resort, Dad. They have golf, swimming, organized trips. You could make friends with people your own age, instead of sitting alone in this big empty house." She walked through my home like she was already mentally arranging its sale, commenting on which furniture would fit in a small apartment and which pieces would need to be donated. When she looked at me, I could see her calculating the cost of my care and the timeline for settling my affairs. But Lucia continued to be a constant source of love and support. She visited twice a week without fail, often stopping by after her shifts at the hospital even when she was exhausted. She brought food, helped with household tasks, and simply spent time talking with me about everything and nothing. One evening, she arrived with a small potted plant, a bright red geranium that immediately brightened my kitchen windowsill. I was at the grocery store and saw this, and it reminded me of the flowers you used to grow in our backyard, she said, adjusting the pot to catch the best light. "Remember how you taught me to deadhead the blooms to keep them flowering?" I remembered those summer afternoons when she was 8 years old, following me around the garden with a tiny watering can, asking endless questions about why plants grew and how to make them healthy. Even then, she had been the one who paid attention, who remembered the small details that mattered. "I've been thinking about getting a little garden started on my apartment balcony," she continued. "Maybe you could help me choose some plants that would do well in containers?" The fact that she was making plans that included me, that she saw our relationship continuing and growing even in my supposedly reduced circumstances, meant everything to me. As autumn turned to winter, I decided it was time to end the charade. The test had revealed everything I needed to know about my children's hearts. I had seen how they responded to crisis, how they treated me when they thought I had nothing left to give them, and how they planned for a future that either included or excluded their father. I called James and Margaret and asked them to arrange a family meeting. I told my children that I needed to discuss my estate planning and my plans for the future. Now that my financial situation had stabilized somewhat, all three agreed to come, though Peter grumbled about having to reschedule a business dinner. We met in James's conference room on a cold January afternoon. The office was all mahogany and leather, with law books lining the walls and afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. My children sat around the polished table looking somewhat uncomfortable, probably expecting me to ask for more help or to announce that I was moving into assisted living. James sat at the head of the table with a stack of documents in front of him. Margaret sat beside him with her laptop open, ready to present financial information. I sat at the opposite end, looking at my 3 children and feeling a mixture of sadness and resolution. "I asked you all here today because I have something important to tell you," I began, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to reveal. "Over the past several months, you've each shown me who you really are. You've revealed your true feelings about family, about responsibility, and about love." Peter shifted in his chair, looking impatient. Maria glanced at her watch. Only Lucia gave me her full attention, her nurse's eyes reading my face for clues about what was coming. "The thing is," I continued, "I haven't lost my money. The cryptocurrency scam, the business failures, the mounting debts, none of it was real. It was a test, and each of you responded exactly as I expected you would." The silence that followed was absolute. Peter's face went through several expressions, confusion giving way to understanding, and then to something that looked like anger. Maria's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. Lucia just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. "You lied to us?" Peter's voice was tight with fury. "You put us through months of worry and stress for some kind of sick test? What kind of worry did you experience exactly?" I asked calmly. Because from where I sat, it looked like relief. Relief that you wouldn't have to take care of your old father. Relief that the burden of family obligations had been lifted from your shoulders. Peter's face flushed red. "That's not fair. We were dealing with our own problems, our own responsibilities. Yes, you were. And when your father needed help, those responsibilities suddenly became more important than family. I turned to Maria, who was still staring at me in disbelief. And you, sweetheart, you were so eager to tuck me away in some facility where I would be someone else's problem. You never once offered to make room for me in your life. Dad, we thought you were broke, Maria protested. We thought you needed professional care, medical supervision. We were looking out for your best interests. Were you? Or were you looking out for your own interests, making sure I was safely contained somewhere while you got on with your lives? I looked at Lucia, who had tears streaming down her face. And then there's you, my dear daughter. You never hesitated to help. You shared your food, your money, your time, your home. You treated me with dignity and love when you thought I had nothing to offer you in return. James cleared his throat and began distributing documents around the table. Your father asked me to prepare a new will based on what he learned during this period. The estate, valued at approximately $8.7 million plus real estate holdings and business assets, will be distributed according to his new wishes. End quote. Peter and Maria both reached for their copies immediately, scanning the pages with desperate eyes. Lucia sat quietly, still processing the revelation that her father's crisis had been fabricated. Peter, I said, watching him read, you're receiving a flat inheritance of $50,000. It's enough to show that I haven't forgotten you're my son, but not enough to fund the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to at my key expense. His face went pale. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm your oldest son, your heir. The business, the properties, you always said they would come to me. I said they would come to someone who deserved them, someone who understood their value and would honor the work that went into building them. You've shown me that you see me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. I turned to Maria, who was frantically flipping through pages. You're receiving $100,000, Maria. It's more than your brother because at least you maintained contact, even if your motives were questionable. This can't be legal, she whispered. You can't just cut us out because of some twisted test. We're your children. Yes, you are, and I'm your father. But being related by blood doesn't automatically make you deserving of the fruits of my lifetime of work. Finally, I looked at Lucia, who was crying silently. Everything else goes to you, sweetheart. The business, the properties, the investments, the cash, all of it. You're the only one who loved me when you thought I was poor, the only one who was willing to sacrifice for my well-being. The room erupted in chaos. Peter slammed his copy of the will down on the table and began shouting about unfairness and favoritism. Maria was sobbing, begging me to reconsider, promising that she would do better if I gave her another chance. Their words crashed over me like waves, but I remained calm. This isn't about punishment, I said when their protests died down. It's about reward. I'm rewarding the child who showed me unconditional love. Lucia earned this inheritance through her actions over the past months. But Dad, Lucia spoke for the first time since the revelation, voice shaky with emotion. I don't want it if it means losing my brother and sister. Can't we find some other way? Even in this moment, when she had just learned she was inheriting millions, her first concern was for family unity. It confirmed everything I had learned about her character during my test. The will can be changed, I told her. If you want to share with your siblings, that's your choice to make. But the decision is yours, not theirs. Peter stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I'm going to contest this. No court will uphold a will based on some psychological game you played with us. James spoke calmly from his end of the table. Mr. Martinez was of sound mind when he executed this will. I can attest to that. The test he conducted, while unusual, doesn't invalidate his right to distribute his assets as he sees fit. The will is legally sound. Peter, please sit down, I said. Let me finish what I have to say. He remained standing, his hands clenched into fists, but he stopped moving toward the door. I'm not doing this to hurt any of you. I'm doing it because I want my legacy to go to someone who will honor it, someone who understands that wealth isn't just about accumulating money, but about caring for the people you love. And I looked around the table at my 3 children, seeing the different expressions on their faces. Peter looked angry and betrayed. Maria looked desperate and calculating, probably already thinking about legal challenges and ways to manipulate the situation. But Lucia just looked sad. For 50 years, I worked 16-hour days to build something I could pass on to my children. I wanted to give you security, opportunities, freedom from the kind of poverty I grew up in. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that the money came from love, from a father's desire to take care of his family." End quote. My voice grew stronger as I continued. "When I pretended to lose everything, I learned that 2 of my children saw me as a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved. But one of you saw me as a father to be loved and protected." I stood up, feeling every one of my 76 years in my bones, but also feeling a strange sense of relief. The test was over. The truth was revealed. Now my children would have to decide how to move forward with this new reality. "Lucia," I said, walking around the table to stand beside her chair, "you can contest the will yourself if you want to give your siblings a larger share. Or you can honor your father's wishes and accept the responsibility that comes with this inheritance." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I never wanted your money, Dad. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I know. That's exactly why you're getting it." The meeting broke up shortly after that, with Peter storming out after delivering a string of threats about legal action and family destruction. Maria left in tears, alternating between begging me to reconsider and accusing me of manipulating the situation. Lucia stayed behind as the conference room emptied, sitting quietly while James and Margaret gathered their papers and excused themselves. "I feel terrible," she said when we were alone. "Peter and Maria are so upset, and it's all because of me." "It's not because of you," I corrected gently. "It's because of the choices they made when they thought I needed them. You chose to love and support me. They chose to distance themselves and plan for my disposal. But they're my family too. I don't want to lose them over money." "Oh." I sat down beside her, taking her hands in mine. "Lucia, do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to be a nurse?" She nodded, confused by the change in topic. "Peter told you it was a waste of time. That nurses didn't make enough money to live well. Maria said you should marry someone rich instead of working so hard. But you stuck with your dream because you wanted to help people, to make a difference in their lives. I remember. You spent your entire adult life putting other people's well-being ahead of your own financial gain. You work night shifts and double banner shifts to take care of patients who need you. You've never asked me for money because you're proud of supporting yourself through your own work." I squeezed her hands gently. "You're the one child who inherited my values along with my DNA. You understand that real wealth comes from relationships, from love, from taking care of the people who matter to you. What am I supposed to do with all this money?" she asked. "I don't know how to manage investments or run a business. You'll learn, and you'll have help. James and Margaret will guide you, and I'll be around for a while longer to teach you what I know. But more importantly, you'll use the money the way it was meant to be used, to take care of people you love." She was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she looked at me with a sad smile. "Are Peter and Maria ever going to forgive us for this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "They might come around eventually, especially if you're generous with them despite what the will says. But even if they don't, you'll know you did the right thing by taking care of your father when he needed you." We left the law office together and drove to my house, the house that now belonged to her along with everything else I had built. As we walked through the rooms where she had grown up, I watched her seeing everything with new eyes. "It feels strange," she said, running her fingers along the kitchen counter where we had eaten so many meals together. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this is all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's the reward for a lifetime of putting family first." That evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, Lucia made a decision that didn't surprise me, but confirmed once again why I had chosen her. "I'm going to give Peter and Maria each another $200,000, she said. "Not because the will requires it, but because they're my brother and sister, and I love them. Even after how they treated you during the past months, they weren't treating me badly. They were treating you badly, and that hurt me because I love you. But they're still family. And maybe if I showed them some generosity, They'll remember what family is supposed to mean." I nodded, proud of her decision but not surprised by it. This was who she was, who she had always been, the child who put relationships ahead of money and love, ahead of self-interest. "There's something else," she continued. "I want to expand your scholarship program at the community college. The one you started for kids from low-income families who want to go into the trades." I had forgotten I had told her about that program. It was something I had started quietly 5 years earlier. Funding scholarships for young people who wanted to learn construction, plumbing, electrical work, and other skilled trades, but couldn't afford the training programs. I had never made a big deal about it, just quietly paid the bills through my accountant. "How did you know about that?" I asked. "Margaret mentioned it once when I was at your office. She said you had helped over 30 kids get their certifications and start their careers. I want to expand it, maybe add healthcare training programs too." This was exactly what I had hoped for, that my legacy would continue through someone who understood the importance of helping others build better lives for themselves and their families. As the months passed, Lucia proved herself worthy of the trust I had placed in her. She took over the management of my business with surprising skill, keeping the construction company running smoothly while learning about real estate investments and financial planning. She hired good people to help her with the areas where she lacked experience. But she made the major decisions herself. More importantly, she used the inheritance to strengthen our family rather than divide it further. The additional money she gave to Peter and Maria helped ease some of the tension, though it didn't completely repair the relationships that had been damaged by my test. Peter eventually accepted the reality of the situation and even began speaking to me again. Though our conversations remained somewhat stiff and formal, he used his inheritance to pay down some debts and invest in a new business venture, but he also started visiting more regularly, perhaps realizing that maintaining a relationship with his sister who now controlled the family wealth was in his best interest. Maria took longer to come around, spending several months barely speaking to any of us, but eventually, she began including Lucia in family gatherings again, and slowly, carefully, she started rebuilding her relationship with me. I think she realized that bitterness would only isolate her further from the family she still needed. The most rewarding part of watching Lucia manage the inheritance was seeing how she balanced business decisions with family considerations. When Peter's new ventures struggled and he needed additional capital, she provided a loan with reasonable terms. When Maria's husband lost a major client and they faced temporary financial difficulties, Lucia quietly paid their mortgage for 6 months until David got back on his feet. She never made them feel like they were begging for charity. She treated these as family obligations, the kind of mutual support that families should provide for each other. It was exactly the approach I had hoped she would take. A year after the revelation in James's office, we were all gathered for Lucia's birthday dinner at her apartment. It wasn't much bigger than it had been when she offered to let me move in. But she had bought the unit next door and expanded into a larger space that could accommodate family gatherings. As I looked around the table at my 3 children and their families, I reflected on the journey we had taken together. The test I had devised had been painful for everyone, but it had also been necessary. It had shown me who my children really were when they thought nothing was at stake except love and responsibility. Peter was telling a story about one of his construction projects, and Maria was laughing at his description of a difficult client. Lucia was serving cake and making sure everyone had what they needed, just as she always did. The relationships weren't exactly the same as they had been before. My deception. But they were perhaps more honest, built on a clearer understanding of who we all were. "Dad," Lucia said, sitting down with her own piece of cake, "I got a letter from the community college about the scholarship program. They want to hold a ceremony to honor the students who graduated this year." "That sounds nice," I replied, though I had never been one for ceremonies and recognition. I told them we'd both be there. These kids want to meet the man who made their education possible. I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine we had shared with dinner. This was what I had worked for, what I had built my fortune to achieve, not just to accumulate wealth, but to use it to make a difference in people's lives. As the evening wound down and my children began gathering their things to leave, Lucia walked me to the door. "Ta, do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The test, I mean. The way everything turned out?" I thought about her question, considering the pain and anger it had caused, the relationships that had been damaged, the trust that had been broken and slowly rebuilt. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. It showed me who you really are, and it showed you who they really are. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better to know it than to live with illusions." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel the strength in her arms, the strength that came from years of lifting patients and working long shifts and carrying responsibilities that would have broken someone weaker. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm proud of the woman you've become." As I drove home that night, I thought about the legacy I was leaving behind. Not just the money and property and business assets, but the example I had set and the values I had tried to instill in my children. Two of them had forgotten those values when they thought my wealth was gone, but one had remembered. And that one would carry forward everything I had worked to build, not just the financial assets but the principles that had guided my life. The test had been harsh, but it had been necessary. It had revealed the truth about my children's hearts, and it had ensured that my life's work would be continued by someone who understood its real purpose. In the end, that was all any father could ask for, to know that his legacy was in good hands, and that his love had been recognized and returned by at least one of his children. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house I had bought 40 years ago, when my children were small and my dreams were just beginning to take shape. Soon this house would belong to Lucia, along with everything else I had built. But tonight, it was still mine, filled with memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet evenings when my children were young and the future stretched ahead of us like an open road. I had made my choices, and my children had made theirs. The test was over, the results were clear, and the future was secure. Tomorrow, I would continue teaching Lucia about the business, helping her understand the investments and partnerships that would be her responsibility. But tonight, I could rest in the satisfaction of knowing that I had found the answer to the question that had haunted me for so long. The question wasn't whether my children loved my money. The question was whether they loved me when they thought the money was gone. And in Lucia, I had found my answer. 2 years have passed since that revelation in the conference room, and I'm now 78 years old. My health isn't what it used to be, and I've started having episodes where my energy simply disappears for days at a time. The doctors say it's normal for a man my age, but I can see the concern in Lucia's eyes when she thinks I'm not looking. She still visits twice a week, but now she brings medical supplies along with the groceries. She checks my blood pressure, monitors my medications, and makes sure I'm eating properly. Sometimes I catch her watching me with the same careful attention she gives her patients at the hospital, and I know she's calculating how much time we have left together. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said during her last visit, as we sat in my living room going over some business documents. "Maybe it's time for you to move in with me. The apartment is bigger now, and I could take better care of you." I looked at her tired face, seeing the exhaustion that comes from working full-time at the hospital while managing a construction business and taking care of an aging father. She had never complained, never suggested that the responsibility was too much, but I could see the toll it was taking. "Sweetheart, you're already doing too much. You don't need an old man underfoot making your life more complicated." "You wouldn't be underfoot, you'd be family." That simple statement reminded me why I had made the right choice. Even now, when caring for me was becoming a real burden, she framed it as a privilege rather than an obligation. But I also knew that she needed to live her own life, to find someone to share her future with, to maybe have children of her own before it was too late. At 48, she was still young enough to start over, but she was spending all her time and energy taking care of her father and managing the inheritance I had given her. "What about David Peterson?" I asked, referring to the emergency room doctor she had mentioned several times in recent months. She blushed slightly, confirming my suspicions that there was more to that friendship than she had admitted. "What about him? You like him, don't you? And he likes you?" "Dad, That's not important right now. You're what's important. Lucia, listen to me carefully. I gave you that inheritance because you proved you know how to love people. But love isn't just about sacrifice and duty. It's also about building a future, about creating new relationships and new families. I reached over and took her hand, feeling how soft it had become now that she wasn't doing physical labor every day, but also noticing the calluses that remained from her hospital work. I want you to pursue whatever makes you happy, whether that's David Peterson or someone else, or just focusing on your career. Don't put your life on hold because of me. But if something happens to you, and I'm not here, then you'll grieve, and you'll heal, and you'll continue living the kind of life that would make your old father proud. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the same kind of decision I had faced when I started my test. How do you balance love with practical concerns? How do you make choices that honor your family while still protecting your own future? There's something else I need to tell you, she said finally. Peter came to see me last week. This surprised me. Peter rarely visited Lucia without a specific reason, and he always called first to schedule appointments rather than just dropping by. What did he want? He's been talking to some lawyers about the business. He thinks there might be grounds to challenge the way the inheritance was structured, especially since you transferred so much of the company to me before you officially retired. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, the same fury I had experienced when I realized how quickly my older children had abandoned me during my fake crisis. What kind of grounds? Something about undue influence and mental competency. He's claiming that you weren't thinking clearly when you made those decisions, that I manipulated you somehow. The irony of this accusation was breathtaking. Peter, who had shown no interest in my well-being when he thought I was poor, was now questioning my mental state in order to claim a larger share of my wealth. What did you tell him? I told him that if he wanted to fight about money, he could fight with the lawyers. But I also told him that I'd be willing to give him and Maria each another $100,000 if he dropped the Dow. Legal challenges. Lucia, you don't need to buy peace with your own inheritance. I'm not buying peace. I'm protecting what you built. A legal fight would be expensive and time-consuming, and it would tie up the business for months or years. It's better to just pay them off and move on. Her practical approach impressed me, but it also saddened me. She was learning to navigate the same kind of family politics that had made me question my children's motives in the first place. Did he accept your offer? He's thinking about it. Maria's already agreed, but Peter wants to talk to more lawyers first. I shook my head, amazed at my son's persistence in pursuing money that he had never earned. Even after everything that had happened, even after seeing how Lucia had stepped up when the family needed someone responsible and caring, he still couldn't accept that merit rather than birth order should determine inheritance. Whatever happens with Peter, don't let it change who you are, I told her. Don't let his greed make you cynical about family relationships. I won't. But it does make me appreciate what you were trying to teach us with your test. Sometimes people's true nature only comes out when something valuable is at stake. As autumn arrived again, I made a decision that I had been considering for months. I called James and asked him to prepare one final addition to my will, a provision that I should have included from the beginning. When Lucia came for our weekly business meeting, I presented her with the new documents. "What's this?" she asked, scanning the legal language. "It's a clause that protects you from exactly the kind of challenge Peter is threatening. It states that anyone who contests the will automatically forfeits their inheritance entirely, regardless of the outcome of the legal challenge." She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Dad, this seems harsh. If Peter loses his lawsuit, he'll get nothing at all. That's the point. He'll have to decide whether a guaranteed $50,000 is better than the risk of getting nothing at all. But what if he's really convinced that he has a valid legal claim? What if he genuinely believes you weren't thinking clearly?" Her generosity toward a brother who was trying to take her inheritance away from her continued to amaze me. Even now, she was looking for ways to give Peter the benefit of the doubt. "Lucia, Peter knows exactly what he's doing. This isn't about concern for my mental health or worry about undue influence. This is about greed, pure and simple. He wants more money, and he's willing to destroy family. relationships to get it. I signed the document modification in front of James and Margaret, making it official. When Peter received his copy of the amended will the following week, his response was immediate and predictable. He called me directly, something he hadn't done in months. "Dad, you can't be serious about this. You're going to cut me out completely just because I'm trying to protect the family legacy?" "What family legacy are you protecting, Peter? The legacy of children who abandon their parents when money gets tight? The legacy of lawsuits and greed and family destruction? I'm protecting the legacy of the business you built, the empire you spent 50 years creating." Lucia doesn't know anything about construction or real estate development. She's been running the business successfully for 2 years now. Profits are up, we've landed 3 major contracts, and employee satisfaction has improved. What exactly do you think she doesn't know? She's a nurse, Dad. She doesn't have the education or the experience to manage a multi-million-dollar company. Neither did I. When I started with nothing but a pickup truck and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. But I learned, and so has she. The conversation ended with Peter hanging up on me, but the message had been delivered. He could accept his original inheritance and maintain some relationship with his family, or he could risk everything on a legal challenge that would probably fail and would definitely destroy what remained of our relationship. 3 days later, James called to tell me that Peter had withdrawn his legal challenge and accepted the terms of the original will. "He's not happy about it," James warned, "but he's being practical. His lawyers probably told him that the no contest clause would be upheld in court." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the business would be protected from a lengthy legal battle, but sadness that my relationship with my oldest son had been reduced to threats and ultimatums. That evening, I called Lucia to give her the news. "I'm glad the legal fight is over," she said, "but I feel terrible that it came to this." "Don't feel terrible. You did nothing wrong. Peter made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. I keep thinking about when we were kids, how close we all were. Do you remember those camping trips we used to take to the lake?" I remembered those trips vividly. Peter teaching Lucia how to bait a fishing hook. Maria collecting shells along the shore, while Lucia helped me set up the tent. All 3 of them roasting marshmallows around the campfire and falling asleep in the back of the station wagon on the drive home. "Those were good times," I agreed. "But people change, sweetheart. The children who went on those camping trips grew up to be adults with different values and different priorities. Maybe they'll change back. Maybe when they get older and have their own family struggles, they'll remember what's really important." Her optimism was touching, but I had learned to be more realistic about human nature. People revealed their true character under pressure, and what Peter and Maria had revealed during my test wasn't something that would change easily. As winter approached, my health began to decline more noticeably. I started having chest pains that sent me to the emergency room twice in 1 month. My energy levels dropped dramatically, and simple tasks like grocery shopping became exhausting endeavors that required rest breaks. Lucia started staying over more frequently, sleeping on my couch so she could monitor my condition and help with daily activities. I protested that she was sacrificing too much of her own life, but secretly, I was grateful for her presence. One morning in early December, I woke up feeling different. Not sick exactly, but fragile, like I was made of glass that might shatter if handled roughly. When I tried to get out of bed, my legs wouldn't support my weight properly, and I had to sit back down to catch my breath. Lucia found me there 20 minutes later when she brought me my morning coffee. "Dad, what's wrong?" She was immediately in nurse mode, checking my pulse and looking into my eyes. "I just feel weak today, like I'm running on empty." She helped me get dressed and insisted on driving me to the hospital for tests. The results confirmed what we both suspected but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. My heart was failing, not dramatically but steadily, and the doctors estimated that I had months rather than years left. "We can try some medications to slow the progression," Dr. Martinez explained as we sat in his office reviewing the test results. "And there are lifestyle changes that might help. But at your age, with the extent of the damage, we're talking about comfort and quality of life rather than cure." Lucia took the news with the professional composure of someone who had received similar diagnoses on behalf of many patients, but I could see the pain in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. That night, sitting in my living room with a fire crackling in the fireplace, I brought up the subject she had been avoiding. "We need to talk about what happens next. You're going to fight this," she said firmly. "You're going to take the medications and follow the doctor's orders, and give us as much time as possible." "I will. But we also need to be realistic about the timeline. And we need to make sure everything is set up properly for when I'm gone." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not ready to lose you. I know, sweetheart. I'm not ready to go either. But we've had more time together than a lot of fathers and daughters get. And we've made the most of it. I keep thinking about all the things I should have said, all the conversations we should have had." "What things?" "How grateful I am for everything you taught me. How proud I am to be your daughter. How much I've learned from watching the way you handle difficult situations." I reached over and took her hand, feeling the familiar softness of her skin and the strength in her fingers. "Lucia, you don't need to say those things because you've shown them through your actions every day for the past 2 years. The way you've managed the business, the way you've taken care of me, the way you've handled your brother and sister with grace, even when they didn't deserve it." End quote. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making the right decisions. Running a construction company isn't exactly what I plan to do with my life. "Are you happy?" She considered the question seriously before answering. "Yes, I think I am. It's different from nursing, but it's still about taking care of people. Just in a different way. Making sure the workers have good jobs and fair wages. Making sure our buildings are safe and well built. Making sure our clients get what they paid for." End quote. Then you're making the right decisions. Happiness combined with purpose is the best anyone can hope for in life. As the weeks passed and my condition continued to deteriorate, Lucia made the decision to take a leave of absence from the hospital so she could spend more time with me. I protested that she was sacrificing too much, but she was adamant. "I've been taking care of other people's families for 25 years, she said. "Now, it's time to take care of my own family." She moved into my house temporarily, setting up a bed in the guest room and converting part of the living room into a medical monitoring station. She hired a home health aide to help during the day when she needed to go to the office, but she handled most of my care herself. During those final months, we had the kind of deep conversations that busy families often put off until it's almost too late. We talked about her childhood memories, about the mistakes I had made as a father, about the dreams she still hoped to pursue. "Do you remember when I was in high school and I wanted to quit the volleyball team because I wasn't good enough to get a scholarship?" she asked one afternoon as she helped me organize some business papers. "I remember telling you that winning wasn't the only reason to play. You said that being part of a team teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else, about cooperation and supporting each other and working towards something bigger than yourself. Do you think that was good advice?" "I think it was perfect advice. And I think that's what running your business has been like. Learning to be part of a team with the employees and the contractors and the clients." These conversations helped me understand that the values I had tried to instill in my children hadn't been lost, at least not in Lucia. She had internalized the lessons about hard work and integrity and taking care of people, and she was applying them in her own life in ways that made me proud. Peter and Maria both visited during those final months, though their visits were awkward and infrequent. Peter came once every few weeks, staying for an hour or two and making conversation about safe topics like weather and local news. Maria came more often but always seemed nervous, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing or triggering another family crisis. I found myself feeling sorry for them both. They had allowed their resentment about the inheritance to create a barrier between us that prevented them from enjoying what little time we had left together. They were missing the opportunity to say goodbye properly, to heal old wounds, to remember the good times we had shared when they were young. But I also understood that this was their choice, just as loving me unconditionally had been Lucia's choice. People respond to difficult situations according to their character, and character is formed over a lifetime of decisions and experiences. In March, Dr. Martinez told us that I probably had weeks rather than months left. My heart was struggling to pump effectively, and my other organs were beginning to show signs of failure. We discussed hospice care and pain management and the logistics of dying at home rather than in a hospital. "I want to ask you something," I told Lucia that evening, as we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. "And I want you to answer honestly. Okay. Do you regret any of the choices you've made over the past few years? Taking on the business, taking care of me, putting your own life on hold?" She was quiet for several minutes, and I could see her really considering the question, rather than just giving me the answer she thought I wanted to hear. "I regret that Peter and Maria couldn't see past the money to understand what was really important," she said finally. "I regret that our family had to be broken apart by a test that should have brought us closer together. What about your own sacrifices?" "They don't feel like sacrifices. They feel like choices I made because I love you and because I believe in the values you taught me. Even giving up your nursing career." "I didn't give it up. I just applied it differently. Taking care of you has been the most important nursing job I've ever had." That night, lying in bed listening to the sounds of my daughter moving around the house, checking locks and turning off lights and making sure everything was secure for the night, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I had tested my children and learned who they really were. I had distributed my wealth to the person who would use it wisely and compassionately. I had seen my business continue to thrive under Lucia's management, and I had spent my final months surrounded by love rather than obligation. The test I had devised had been painful for everyone involved, but it had also been necessary. It had revealed truths that needed to be revealed and had ensured that my legacy would be in the right hands. Most importantly, it had shown me that one of my children had truly inherited the values I had tried to teach them all. In a world where money so often corrupts relationships and destroys families, I had found one person who understood that love is more valuable than wealth, and that taking care of each other is the highest calling any of us can answer. As I drifted off to sleep that final night, I thought about the young man I had been 50 years ago, working 16-hour days and dreaming of building something that would last beyond my own lifetime. I had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations, not just in accumulating wealth, but in raising a daughter who would honor the principles that had guided my life. The test was over. The results were clear. And I could rest knowing that my story would continue through someone who truly understood what it meant to love unconditionally. I passed away peacefully in my sleep 3 days later, with Lucia holding my hand and whispering that she loved me. The last thing I heard was her voice promising that she would take care of everything, that she would make me proud, that she would remember everything I had taught her about what really matters in life. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she would keep those promises. Because that's who she was, who she had always been, the daughter who loved her father, not for what he could give her, but for who he was. The daughter who had earned every dollar of the inheritance I left her, not through birth order or family politics, but through the simple act of loving without conditions. That was the real lesson of my test, the truth I had needed to discover before I died. Love isn't something you can buy or inherit or demand. It's something you earn through your actions, day after day, choice after choice, until it becomes who you are rather than just something you feel. Lucia had earned my love and my trust through 2 years of selfless care, and in the end, that meant more than all the money in the world. 6 months after my funeral, Lucia sat in the same conference room where I had revealed the truth about my test, but this time, she was the one calling the meeting. Peter and Maria sat across from her, both looking uncomfortable and uncertain about why they had been summoned. James Woodward shuffled through a stack of papers before clearing his throat. "Lucia asked me to arrange this meeting because she has some things she wants to discuss with both of you." Peter leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed defensively. "If this is about the business, I already told you I'm not interested in working for my little sister." "This isn't about the business," Lucia said quietly. "This is about Dad's final wishes, things he never got the chance to tell you before he died." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope with Carlos Martinez written on the front, in my familiar handwriting. He gave me this letter 2 weeks before he passed away. He made me promise not to open it until 6 months after the funeral, and not to read it to you until I felt ready to hear what he had to say." Maria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "What kind of letter?" "His final thoughts about our family, about the test, about what he hoped would happen after he was gone." Lucia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. "He wanted me to wait because he knew emotions would be running high right after the funeral." She unfolded the pages, and I could imagine her seeing my handwriting one last time, the slightly shaky letters that had marked my final months. "He starts by saying that he hopes the 6 months have given all of us time to think about what really matters. He says he knows the test hurt everyone, but he believes it was necessary to ensure his legacy went to the right person." Peter scoffed. More justification for his psychological games. "Let her finish," Maria said sharply, and I would have been pleased to hear the protective tone in her voice, even if it came too late to matter to me. Lucia continued reading. "He says, 'Peter, you were my firstborn, and I had such high hopes for you. I wanted to see you carry on the business I built, to be the son who inherited my drive and determination. But you inherited my stubbornness without my work ethic, and my ambition without my compassion for others. When I needed you most, you saw me as a burden rather than a father who deserved your loyalty." Peter's face flushed red, but he remained silent. "Maria, you were my baby, and perhaps I spoiled you too much when you were young. I wanted to give you everything I never had. But in doing so, I taught you to expect rather than to earn. When my crisis came, you were quick to find solutions that would remove me from your life rather than make room for me in it." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hand to her mouth. "But I also want you both to know that I understand why you responded the way you did. I failed as a father in some ways, giving you comfort without teaching you responsibility, providing for your wants without helping you develop character. The test revealed not just your flaws, but my own failures in raising you." Lucia paused, wiping her own eyes with a tissue before continuing. "That's why I'm asking Lucia to give you both one more chance, not to contest the will or change the inheritance, but to prove that you can learn and grow from this experience. I've asked her to offer you both positions in the company, not as owners but as employees who can earn their way up through hard work and dedication." Both Peter and Maria looked stunned by this revelation. "Peter, there's a foreman position available on the Northwest construction crew. It pays $4,000 to $5,000 a year. And if you prove yourself reliable and hard-working, you can advance to project manager within 2 years. It won't be easy work, and you'll be taking orders from people who know more than you do. But it will teach you what I never managed to teach you about earning respect." Peter's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. "Maria, there's an administrative position available in the main office, handling client relations and project coordination. It pays $38,000 a year, with opportunities for advancement based on performance. You'll learn how the business actually works from the ground up, something that will serve you well whether you stay with the company or move on to something else." Lucia folded the letter and looked at her siblings. "He wanted me to make these offers because he believed that people could change if they were given the right motivation and guidance. The positions are real, and they're available if you want them." "You want me to work construction?" Peter asked incredulously. "Manual labor for $45,000 a year when I used to manage million-dollar projects?" "Those million-dollar projects failed because you didn't understand the fundamentals of the business," Lucia replied, calmly. "Dad's offering you a chance to learn those fundamentals. And you want me to be a secretary?" Maria's voice was sharp with indignation. "I want you to be whatever you choose to be," Lucia said. "But if you choose to accept Dad's offer, you'll be learning valuable skills while earning an honest living." The room was quiet for several minutes as Peter and Maria processed this unexpected opportunity. Finally, Peter spoke. "What if we say no? What if we're not interested in starting over at the bottom? Then you say no, and life goes on. But you'll always wonder what might have happened if you had been willing to humble yourselves and learn something new." Maria was crying openly now, the tears streaming down her face as she struggled with emotions she had been suppressing for months. "I miss him," she whispered. "I miss Dad." And I hate that our last conversations were about money and legal challenges. He knew you missed him, Lucia said gently. That's why he wanted to give you both another chance. Why are you doing this? Peter asked. You could have just kept the letter to yourself and never told us about these job offers. Because despite everything that's happened, you're still my brother and sister. And because Dad believed that people deserve second chances when they're willing to work for them. James cleared his throat. If you're interested in either position, you'll need to go through the standard application and interview process. Lucia won't give you special treatment just because you're family. Actually, that's not entirely true, Lucia corrected. I'll expect more from you than I would from other employees, not less. If you take these jobs, you'll have to prove yourselves every single day. Over the following weeks, both Peter and Maria surprised everyone by accepting the offers. Peter reported to the construction site every morning at 7 a.m., learning to operate equipment and follow safety protocols under the supervision of crew chiefs who had worked for the company for 20 years. The work was hard and dirty, and his soft hands developed calluses for the first time in decades. Maria struggled initially with the administrative work, having to learn computer systems and project management software while dealing with demanding clients and tight deadlines. But gradually, she began to understand the complexity of coordinating multiple construction projects and the importance of clear communication between all parties. Neither of them complained, at least not publicly. They both seemed to understand that this was their final opportunity to prove they could honor their father's legacy through their actions rather than their birth order. Lucia watched their progress carefully, offering guidance when they asked for it, but refusing to make things easier just because they were family. She held them to the same standards she applied to every employee, and slowly, they began to earn the respect of their co-workers through competence rather than connections. 6 months after they started working for the company, Lucia called another family meeting. This time, they met at her apartment over dinner rather than in a lawyer's office. I wanted to tell you both how proud Dad would be of the effort you've been putting in, she said as they shared a meal she had cooked herself. The crew chiefs have nothing but good things to say about your work. Peter looked up from his plate, his face tanned from months of outdoor work. It's different than I expected. Harder in some ways, but also more satisfying. When you build something with your own hands, you feel connected to it in a way I never understood before. I never realized how many details go into every project, Maria added. Managing budgets and schedules and permits and inspections. Dad made it look easy, but it's incredibly complex. He didn't make it look easy, Lucia corrected. He made it look effortless because he had 40 years of experience. You're just seeing how much knowledge and skill he had accumulated. They talked long into the evening about their father, sharing memories that had been buried under years of resentment and misunderstanding. They remembered the camping trips and the birthday parties and the quiet moments when he had tried to teach them important lessons about life. I think I understand now why he did the test, Peter said, as they were cleaning up the dishes. He needed to know that his life's work would continue with someone who shared his values, not just his DNA. And he needed to give us a chance to learn those values ourselves, Maria added. Even if it took us longer than it should have. That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter in their family's story, one built on earned respect rather than inherited privilege. It wasn't the same as the relationships they might have had if the test had never happened, but it was honest and genuine in a way their previous interactions had never been. And somewhere, I knew I was resting peacefully, knowing that my children had finally learned the lesson I had spent a lifetime trying to teach them. Love and respect aren't given freely just because of family connections. They're earned through actions and choices and the willingness to put others' needs ahead of your own desires. The test had ended, but its lessons would continue for generations to come.